have faith.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the faith still works in the same way.
Hmm.
It's just I was asking you earlier, like if you feel like faith has to do with God,
Hmm.
but I don't think it does.
Okay, got it. So I guess it depends on the context by which you're using faith. So does faith matter in the context of if you are trying to receive a result that requires God's attention, then faith matters. And what your faith in matters, what your faith is put in matters. In other words, let me give an example. So we can go back to the story of Elijah and the Baal worshippers. So there was a point in time where the during this time is the Israelites were basically living in rebellion towards God. They were worshiping Baal and things like that. And King Ahab at the time was an evil ruler, him and his wife Jezebel. So at this point, Elijah essentially called all the prophets of Baal and he challenged them and he said, okay, look, I challenge you guys and your God. And what he did was he set up a situation where they basically had to sacrifice an animal and he was going to call down fire from heaven. And whichever God answered by fire was the God that was real. So that was the challenge. Basically, very simply put, we're going to both call down fire from heaven. Let's see which God answers, the God of Israel or Baal. And after they performed this little experiment, as I'm sure you're already aware, the Baal worshippers, no matter how much they believed, no matter how much they cut themselves, no matter how much they chanted and, were yelling to their God Baal and asking him to perform the miracle, nothing happened. So Elijah starts mocking them and he's saying, oh, what is he sleeping? Is he not hearing you? Yada, yada, whatever. Anyway, after that, Elijah called on God and God performed it and you brought down fire from heaven and, burned made the sacrifice for the animal. So this is a very visual example of where our faith is placed matters because they both believed what they were saying. Elijah believed in the God of Israel, and the Baal worshippers believed in Baal, and they were both believing and praying and asking and calling upon the God of their belief in order to bring down fire from heaven. But only one God actually worked. Only one God actually performed the miracle, and that was the true God. So their faith, misplaced faith, is not going to bring about the results that we want in the context of God. If you're talking about faith in terms of just, I don't know, belief in yourself or belief you're going to beat somebody else in a basketball game or, something of that sort, then yeah, a person's faith and if they have more belief in themselves is probably going to help them to be able to, you know, beat the other team. But if we're talking about faith in the context of calling upon God, then scripturally speaking, where you place your faith is is extremely important and it's just as valid as the where you place your faith matters, very simply put.
I hear you. I do disagree on one point where I think it matters when you go up against someone else with faith, like in that situation, Elijah clearly had the stronger faith, but it's not like the people that he was going up against had no faith because up until that moment, whatever mumbo jumbo they were doing, they clearly believed enough, to go up against Elijah,
Yeah.
like they had some degree of faith that drove their civilization to some peak, but they were proven wrong with a greater faith. So I still hold true to the idea that I don't think the faith itself matters, but I do hear what you're saying with where the faith is placed may matter. It's tough because and every scenario I look at, like going back to the Daniel scenario, he was captured by at the time the greatest civilization. I can't say that they had no faith in building that civilization. They had to. They had to have, like almost unshakable faith. And I say almost because it was shaken with Daniel,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
him going in and being mandated to have to pray to a king instead of God and still choosing God without a guarantee of what is to happen, and then being thrown into a lion's den without any other guarantee. I feel like he just had the greater faith. So more so, he was put into a situation that seems impossible to most people. Most people just either break down and give up, or they'll just relinquish their faith.
Mm-hmm.
But through whatever he'd been through and whatever he was taught beforehand, kept him structured. On the flip side, I would argue that if Babylon had a stronger faith, maybe they would have broken Daniel. I'm just saying that to say that, hey, the faith battle is a win and lose type of thing. There are people that are quote unquote faithful that get put through certain situations that are just too much for them, you know, and their faith is broken. And on the flip side, there's people that are like persecutors, like Paul saw, and their faith is broken
Mm-hmm.
because their belief system was to persecute,
Mm-hmm.
So I think faith is a tricky subject when it comes down to what you put it in. Yeah, I do agree that what you put it in is important, but I don't think it needs a specific just cause. I think it will work either way.
Yeah, see that's yeah, that's going to be where we so it's where you place your faith, what you place your faith in matters. Because if you think about faith like a key in order to unlock a door, now imagine you have the wrong key to a door. It doesn't matter how much you believe that the door is going to open from that key. If the key is not the right fit, if it's not the key that was designed for the door, then the door is not going to open. So it's the same thing with God. If we are trying to communicate with God, again, remember that in the if the context is about communicating with God specifically, if you're trying to communicate with God and He demands that you have faith in Him, you communicating with false gods or gods that don't exist is like the equivalent of putting in a key in a door that the door wasn't designed for. It doesn't matter your belief and how strongly you believe in that. If it's not real, it's not going to achieve the result that it is that we're looking for. So I think it's very important that we understand the where you place your faith, what you're placing your faith in, and how that affects your ability to communicate with God, who requires, as the scripture says, a person that comes to God must know that He is, and that He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So it's important that we place our faith and that we believe in the God that it is that we're praying to, and that God has to be the true God, according to the way that He reveals Himself. It can't just be a God of how we personally want to imagine Him to be. So that's what I would say for that.